Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we react to the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so that you do not have to. It is such a mitzvah that we perform. And I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being here to join us. We could call the show Elites Say the Craziest Things because,
That's true.
man, these elites, they
They
are
really
crazy.
do.
They are
Yeah,
crazy. And we have a whole bunch of crazy statements from elites today, as we always do.
as we always do. Yeah. And guys, before we kick off, please do your patriotic duty as useful idiots, useful idiot enablers, and give us a like, give us a thumbs up. Don't do it twice because that cancels it out, but give us a thumbs up. And we like to think of this as a communal experience, which is why there's a huge table behind Aaron, because we are offering you all a seat at the table.
That's such a lovely metaphor.
Yeah,
Yes,
it really is.
yes, yes, yes. That reminds me of Amy Goodman Stump's speech where she says, I think of media as a giant kitchen table where everybody sits around and gets to have a role in the discussion. So that's how
Wow.
we see you, our audience as well, except we're the only ones who get to talk. And
Right.
sometimes we read your comments, and sometimes Katie
Yeah.
gets mad at them.
It's true,
Yes.
yeah. So I like that everyone has a role. I actually imagined initially like a roll of bread at the
Hmm,
table, but that's of course
interesting.
not what she means.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we welcome you into our kitchen, our family home, and unfortunately, we have some crazy house guests today.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
They're called the most powerful people in the world. The people who rule over us are overlords who appear on the Sunday morning news shows and spew their unhinged uh, imperialism and classism and racism and all these horrible things. And we have a whole bunch of them free today.
And Aaron, do you want to break the news about? I guess I should have warned people at the beginning that we have some terrible news, which is that Meet the Press was preempted.
Yes. Well, the world's gain is our loss because it means we're deprived of some primetime content for our Monday morning recap show. But everyone else got a day off of Meet the Press, which I think is not a bad thing for the
Yeah.
planet. But yeah, it is our loss. But we'll try to make up for it
Yeah.
with all the other networks and their craziness.
All right. So let's go to our first clip. What do we got?
Okay. Well, the big news this weekend was Israel massacring well over 200 Palestinians during an operation that ended up rescuing 4 hostages held in Gaza. There were reports that actually Israel killed some of its own hostages in the process. I haven't checked in on the latest with that. But of course, because some hostages were freed, the U.S. media and U.S. elites were giddy. And basically the massacre of over 200 Palestinians in the process, I believe it's close to 300, really, I should say, more than 200, close to 300 Palestinians. That was just a footnote, basically, because yes, some Israeli hostages managed to be freed. And of course, all this could have been avoided had Israel and the U.S. accepted the proposals that were on the table before Israel even invaded. Because recall that Hamas offered Israel to release all the hostages if Israeli troops did not enter Gaza, which
Right.
Israel, of course, immediately rejected. So
Right.
here we are now, many months later, and yet more people massacred during Israel's unending campaign.
Right. And this is what you should tell people who believe that the hostages are Israel's priority. If they still believe that, I think it's hard to believe it. But uh, as Aaron just pointed out, there was an offer to release all hostages. And of course, if Israel cared about the hostages more than killing Palestinians, they would have accepted that.
So here is Martha Raddatz of ABC News.
This morning, 4 Israeli hostages are back in the arms of their loved ones after a dramatic but deadly rescue mission by the Israeli Defense Forces in central Gaza. Among the rescued, Noah Argamani. The 26-year-old had become one of the symbols, the human faces of Hamas brutality. Noah was seized on October 7th from the
She says there Noah was one of the human faces of Hamas brutality.
Right.
Are there any Palestinians who are the human face of Israeli brutality? There should be plenty of candidates given that Israel has killed tens of thousands of people, whereas Hamas killed hundreds of people on October 7th. But it's amazing. There's not one face, at least in the U.S. corporate media, of Israeli brutality, because that brutality to them doesn't really exist. It's just normalized, and in fact, they cheer it on. But Hamas brutality, that's a thing, and people like this become the face of it. And it's interesting to actually look at her face now because, as we can see from the video footage coming up, and from all accounts of what she said so far, she was treated pretty well by her Hamas captors. Now compare that to how Palestinians look when they escape Israel, when they're let out of Israeli dungeons. They're gaunt, and of course, many of them haven't even survived because they've been killed, like the doctor from Al Shifa Hospital who was murdered after being kidnapped by Israel. So that's just an important contrast.
Right. And it's interesting to note that an Israeli anchor was actually fired because she pointed out that this woman, this hostage, she said her eyebrows are better than mine. Which, I mean, regardless of what you think of that, it's a sign that she was able to, I guess, maintain her eyebrow regime. But Aaron, you mentioned that there weren't human faces of Israeli brutality. I just wanted to show this contrast between what happens to Israeli prisoners and what happens to Palestinian prisoners. So we're going to compare what Noah Argaman looks after 8 months of detention versus Bassem Tamimi, who is a Palestinian activist who was also detained for 8 months. And as you can see, he's gaunt, he's lost tons of weight, and his hair is now white. So that's the face of
And
Israeli brutality.
he of course comes from a very famous family of people who have defended their land in the occupied West Bank. His daughter is also very famous, known around the world. And she was the one who slapped an Israeli soldier when he came to their village, and she's been imprisoned as well.
Yeah.
And so that's like a famous political prisoner, and that's how he is treated when he comes out.
Exactly. And of course, he's a nonviolent. I mean, not of course. I should point out, like most activists in Palestine, he's committed to nonviolence, and this is how they treat their, nonviolent activists. So let people know when people say, where are their nonviolent leaders? Well, a lot of them are in jail or killed.
Yeah. In the case of Ahed Tamimi, his daughter, she was like literally a child when they when they imprisoned her and have harassed her since. And she's been, I think, in prison multiple times.
Yeah.
Okay,
it was
let's go back.
It wasn't killing, and she was a little kid when that happened. I just realized after I said the nonviolent thing, people may think that contradicts it, but it doesn't, because we're talking about stronger nonviolence than a little kid slapping a soldier. Okay.
Yeah, I think the occupying soldier survived the child slap.
Yeah.
Yes.
Somehow. Yes. Yeah. A tribute to Israeli medical advances, surely. Okay, let's go back to Martha.
Music festival, terrorized, thrown on the back of a motorcycle, and taken into Gaza. And this was Noah on Saturday, reuniting with her family for the first time in 8 months. Israelis cheering the news of the largest rescue of hostages since the terrorist attack in October. But the rescue left a devastating toll for Palestinians, with more than 270 killed in the mission, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. It comes amid ongoing negotiations for the release of all the remaining 116 hostages, including 8 American Israelis, as part of a larger ceasefire in this deadly war. ABC News 4.
So there you go. Basically, it took her to the very end to mention that 275 Palestinians were massacred by Israel in an operation that rescued 4 Israelis and may have killed Israeli hostages.
Right.
We know.
But what's important to remember, Aaron, when we do hear about those numbers, they are, of course, from the Hamas-run health ministry.
Yes.
Notice it's never, the equivalent is never said about Israeli statistics. No one says the Likud run.
Mm-hmm.
Just such a blatant example of double standards. But not surprising, I guess.
Yes. All right. Well,
we have,
let's hear from someone who I really hate hearing from, but we have to. So his name is Peter Lerner. Like pretty much every Israeli spokesperson I can think of, he's not from
Hebrew
Israel.
Accent, right?
Yeah, he's like another settler. He's a settler in a settler state. He comes
Right.
from, I think, South Africa or something. I don't know. Anyway, here he is to whitewash Israel's latest massacre.
And Colonel, part of this mission were the airstrikes. We saw buildings destroyed in a civilian area in broad daylight. There were people on the street during this attack through the air. Did you factor in the loss of so many Palestinians in this operation?
That's such an irresponsible and ahistorical question. Did you factor in the loss? As if Israel usually factors in the loss, as if Israel is usually contained or curtailed by the potential number of people killed. I mean, this is just consistent with what Israel does. What would be newsworthy is if they did factor it in, as opposed to did not. That's the default, that they did factor it in. I mean, this is a win-win for Israel, because not only do they free hostages, although not that many, but they free hostages and they kill Palestinians. It's not but they killed them, it's and they killed them.
I mean, the whole conversation is so stupid because, of course, were this any other, or at least were this like a Western
Yeah.
place where civilians live, there's no way the U.S. or Israel or anybody in the corporate media would ever cheer on an operation that slaughters a bunch of civilians to rescue hostages. Like, say if for some reason New York City was walled off and closed off, and everybody was trapped there, like the people are in Gaza. If there were some hostages being held there, nobody in the U.S. would cheer on destroying like parts of the city and massacring a bunch of New Yorkers just to rescue those hostages. Of course not. But because Palestinians are dehumanized, their lives don't matter. Yeah, kill anyone you want, and maybe afterwards we're going to ask you if you properly factored in their lives before you slaughtered all of them. The conversation is it's so completely skewed.
Yeah, it really is.
So we don't know how many casualties were caused in the strike in the release and rescue operation. And I'd be very cautious at accepting any figures and numbers that Hamas are putting out.
But even the Israelis, Hamas is putting out 274, but even the Israelis, another spokesman from the IDF said there were fewer than 100. That's a significant amount of casualties. Did they come from those airstrikes in broad daylight?
Martha, every civilian life lost in this war is a tragedy. Every civilian life lost in this war as a result of how Hamas has operated. Let's think about just
something to look out for is this is how Israel or Israel enablers always respond to questions about the number of civilians, which is that every human life is a tragedy, which is a way to just obfuscate the obscene numbers. I mean, of course, every human killed is a tragedy, but there is it's notable when you are killing over 200. And they want to turn this into this like abstract question of the value of human life. Drink every time you hear that. Sorry, let me rewind a little bit.
In this war as a result of how Hamas has operated. Let's think about just for a moment where they.
That's just patently untrue because we know Hamas offered to release all hostages in exchange for Israel not invading Gaza. So surprise, surprise, he just lied.
They were holding the hostages within civilian houses, within people's apartments. In the same apartment, they were being held were the families that own the apartments. This exemplifies specifically how Hamas are operating. And indeed, when we extracted and snatched the hostages, Noah Argamani, Almog Meir, Andrei Kozlov, and Shlomi Ziv, when we extracted them out, the forces came under extensive attack in an attempt to kill both them and the hostages.
And is that the reason for the airstrikes? Tell me why those airstrikes were necessary, why buildings were destroyed in that attack.
The forces came under fire from a 360-degree threat. RPGs, AK-47s, explosive devices on the way, mortar rounds. It was and is a war zone. And so civilians in that is the tragedy of civilians being caught up in this is precisely because of how Hamas is battling us on the battleground. Our responsibility, our first and foremost responsibility, is to rescue the hostages, to bring them home, to create a better security situation for Israelis, and I would say for...
You're muted.
Israel's other responsibilities include not occupying millions of people and denying them their rights because they're not Jewish. But putting that aside, if your only responsibility is to rescue the hostages, there are alternatives to using force and massacring civilians. You could negotiate, as we keep saying, and there have been options for that. There was an option at the start before Israel invaded. And since then, Hamas's demand remains a permanent end to Israel's onslaught in exchange for the release of the remaining captives. But Israel doesn't want that because Israel reserves the right to use force whenever it wants and doesn't want to end this mass murder campaign before it's ready to. So that's why operations like this are happening, because it won't actually attempt to negotiate seriously to free all the hostages, not just these 4 that were rescued here.
Right. Just lying through his teeth.
And by the way, it's worth pointing this out when we're talking about Israel and like, does this guy look like he comes from the Middle East?
Not
Is
so
this the
much.
Middle Eastern?
And he is British, by the way. He's from England.
Yeah. Yet these are the people who claim that they're now back in their ancestral homeland and have the right to basically murder the people who have been there for centuries, the indigenous people. The vast majority of the people of Gaza are refugees or the descendants of refugees. And now people like him are making them refugees once again, if not slaughtering them, as has happened to tens of thousands of people.
Also, really important comment. This guy looks like one of those potatoes that grew hair on your windowsill as a kid. I actually thought he meant Mr. Potato Head. I think he looks more like Mr. Potato Head. But anyway, we'll agree to disagree, Eric. We'll agree to semi-disagree. All right. Back to the clip.
Palestinians alike. Hamas have to go. Hamas can't be trusted with the powers of government because that is what they will do. They will build a terrorist army. They will infiltrate into Israel.
He wants Israel to be the only terrorist army in town. That's their lane. He doesn't want the competition.
And abduct party goers from the Nova Party and hold them hostage in places like Nuseirat, in apartment buildings.
Again, Colonel, we are all grateful the hostages are safe, but just one final question. Would you carry out a similar rescue mission to get the other 116 hostages, no matter the cost to civilians in Gaza?
There can be a rescue mission like what happened yesterday, but there could also be negotiations that create the opportunity. Our role is to create the conditions either way, that Hamas realize that they should give back the hostages. They should set the hostages free. We would not have to be at war at all with Hamas. And the war can be over today if Hamas lets the hostages free. Is that too much to ask?
Well, yes, it is. If you're saying you're only going to commit to a 6-week pause, and then you reserve the right after that to continue carrying out mass murder if you want to, which is Israel's position.
Right.
So, given that Hamas doesn't want to voluntarily agree to implode and destroy itself, and agree to allow Israel to continue carrying out mass murder, then that's a recipe for this to continue.
Right.
And for more hostages to be killed.
Right.
Because of course, even one of the freed hostages, Noah, I believe, she said she was almost killed in an airstrike on one of the places she was staying. I believe it happened while she was actually allowed to go out shopping in disguise, or some sort of similar circumstance to that. So basically, Israel, by continuing it this way, is putting not just the Palestinians at risk that it slaughters at will, but also its own captives.
Yeah. Who knows? And they've killed more people than we know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, meanwhile, all this raises the question of what was the U.S. role in all of this, including what was the role of Biden's so-called aid pier, which is not even operational because it's such a disaster. But apparently the captives were taken to an area very near the pier, and there's been a lot of speculation, like, was this pier used for this operation? So Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, he's going to be asked about the nature of the U.S. role, and watch how he does not give us a very clear answer.
Shocking.
By White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who's traveling with the president in France. Good morning to you, Jake. I wanted to start with American support for this mission in Israel, in Gaza. The U.S. provided support for that mission. Was it just logistical or intelligence help, or were they part of the planning?
Well, first, Martha, we didn't have any U.S. forces on the ground. Second, we've been working for months to support Israel in its efforts to rescue and recover hostages from Gaza, including the American hostages. And there weren't Americans among these four. But I'm not going to speak further to intelligence or operational matters because we need to protect their sensitivity.
We're all very grateful.
So not a very clear answer there from Jake. He's asked, what was the U.S. role? Was it intelligence, logistical? And all he says basically is we didn't have U.S. forces on the ground,
Right.
which says to me that the U.S. was very heavily involved in this. And there have been reports already about the U.S. providing intelligence support. And given that, if it's just that alone, intelligence support, then the U.S. then has put itself complicit once again in a massacre, the latest one. And given that there's a pending case now against Israel at the ICC, this raises the question of, why isn't the Biden administration, why aren't they being added to the list of people who should be indicted?
Very good question.
The hostages are free, of course, but the Hamas-run Gaza Ministry of Health says that hundreds were killed, more than 200 were killed. Do you think that is an accurate number, and does that concern you?
Well, of course, the Israeli Defense Forces have put out one number. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry has put out another number. We're looking into it. It will take some time for us to make any kind of determination, and we may never be able to definitively determine it. But we do know this, Martha.
Oh, well, too bad. We might never know how many people we killed in this latest massacre. Oh, well, we'll never know. Never. It's because the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says a number. We can't trust them, even though we've used their numbers many times over the years before October 7th. Sorry, we'll never know.
And remember what I said about the way people respond to being asked about the number of people killed by leaning into cliches about the sanctity of human life?
Civilians were killed, and that is tragic. It is heartbreaking. I've said before that the Palestinian people are going through hell in this war. They're caught in the crossfire. Hamas hides among civilian infrastructure, hides underground, and puts the Palestinian people in harm's way. And this.
Okay, if you don't want Hamas to be around civilians, I have a brilliant idea. Stop occupying the Gaza Strip. Stop besieging it. Stop preventing anybody from leaving. Stop even denying cancer patients the right to leave, which Israel has done over the years with full U.S. support. To the extent Hamas is hiding among civilians, that's because they're all trapped in the same small little strip of land. So, of course, inevitably, Hamas is going to be in the area of civilians because it's
they have nowhere else
over 2
to
million
go.
people trapped in a little death camp. So let them leave and stop occupying and bombarding them.
Right.
It's a very simple way to separate Hamas from the civilians of Gaza.
Exactly.
Whole thing, this whole tragedy could be over. All the hostages could be home. There could be a ceasefire if Hamas would just step up and say yes to the deal that the Israelis have accepted and that President Biden elaborated a week ago. So the world should call on Hamas to take this deal.
But
Netanyahu said he's not accepting the deal that Biden put out a week ago. And they went out of their way. Biden was like, this is an Israeli proposal. This is an Israeli proposal. And then Netanyahu immediately was like, yeah, no, we're not ending this war until we decide that we're ready to end it.
Yeah. And they're just saying this they're just lying through their teeth. I know that's not newsworthy. That's what they do every week. But this is especially brazen.
Let's go back to those numbers. The Palestinians say more than 200. The Israelis say not more than 100. That is a lot of people to be killed in a rescue operation. Again, does that number concern you?
Okay, here we go. Here's the sanctity of life spiel.
Well, every single loss of an innocent civilian in Gaza or anywhere else concerns us. It more than concerns us. It's tragic. It breaks our heart. It's awful. And that's why President Biden is working so hard to bring this war to an end. And he went out And he laid out a roadmap to achieve an enduring ceasefire, all of the hostages coming home, and the capacity for Gaza to be rebuilt so that Palestinians would not just be safe, but could have a better future.
Jake, we're talking.
You know, Israel is so opposed to a ceasefire, the same ceasefire that Jake Sullivan and Biden pretend Israel supports, that Israel doesn't even want to use the term ceasefire. At the UN, there's a talk of a new UN resolution, and an initial draft had the word ceasefire in it. And Israel wants that changed to cessation of hostilities, because ceasefire implies something permanent, whereas Israel just wants to pause the hostilities, which means it's mass murder, to get its captives home and then resume slaughtering Palestinians en masse.
About this specific operation, please. Can we talk about this specific operation? Are you?
I'm actually surprised. She kind of calls him out there. She's like, okay, enough of your statement about the value of human life. I'm asking you about this specific thing. Will you answer the question?
Not concerned with either of those numbers, whether it's 100 or 200. And I know you were concerned about loss of life, but we're talking about this military mission, not the ceasefire just yet.
Well, Martha, as I just said, and I will say it again, as many times as you asked the question, we are concerned about every loss of life.
She's literally saying to him, I don't want to hear your opinion about the loss of life per se. I'm asking you about this specific operation. And his response is, let me say once again, my concerns about the loss of life.
Martha, I will repeat what's written on my cue cards as many times as you actually ask me a substantive question. I will always parrot my cue cards.
Yeah.
Including in this operation, anytime civilians are killed, we're concerned. Of course we are. That's why we want this war to end. The only way to get all of the hostages out and to end any more civilian casualties in Gaza is to get to a comprehensive ceasefire and hostage agreement. So the two are not distinct issues.
That's a nice tacit admission that Israel is carrying out collective punishment.
Right.
The only way to stop
every now and then.
The only way for there to be no more civilian casualties in Gaza is for Hamas to accept our terms. Otherwise, sorry, more civilians have to die. So basically, civilian death is one of our points of leverage here.
Right.
We're going to keep imposing that on you until you submit. And in this case, it means accepting a 6-week pause after which Israel is free to resume killing people en masse. That's basically Jake Sullivan saying that. And collective punishment, so be it. I mean, they're on board with Israel blocking aid because they've done nothing to stop Israel from doing that, except build a fake pier, which doesn't even work and has had to be shut down because it's such a disaster. That's what Jake Sullivan and Biden have been working hard at, is covering up for Israel as it carries out this unending slaughter.
Right. And we should hopefully these interviews will be used in a case about U.S. complicity in collective punishment.
All right. Well, it's always a struggle, but we have more Jake Sullivan. So let's go to Jake Sullivan next on speaking to Useful Idiot's fan favorite, Dana Bash, the one who said that college students are akin to college students protesting mass murder are akin to German Nazis in the 1930s.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
The treatment of Jewish students on campus is reminiscent of 1930s Germany.
Yeah. By which, and she's referring specifically to pro-genocide Jewish students, not anti-genocide Jewish students, because there are plenty of anti-genocide Jewish students, but they don't matter to Dana Bash.
Right, and those are the ones who have been arrested, the anti-genocide ones, and those are the ones who have been physically assaulted, as opposed to the pro-genocide ones. All right, let's take a look at this.
No one can deny the amazing news of seeing these innocent civilians who were finally brought back to their families from Gaza after being held there for 8 months. But is the U.S. comfortable with the way that the Israelis carried out the mission?
Look, Dana, why is President Biden going out publicly and calling for a ceasefire and hostage deal? It's because he thinks the best way to get all of the hostages home is in a deal where they're brought out diplomatically, where there's no need for military operations to get every last hostage out. So that would obviously be the best solution to this. In the absence of that, without Hamas saying yes to the deal, unfortunately, we are going to continue to see ongoing conflict and military operations in which Israel makes efforts to recover its citizens and, frankly, to recover American citizens. What we would much prefer to see is a ceasefire where the hostages come out peacefully. That is available. Israel has said yes to it. Now,
it's such a lie. He doesn't want to see negotiated settlement because he's insisting that Hamas accept Israel's terms, which does not guarantee an end to the war. It just means Hamas gives up all the captives and Israel is free to resume killing people if it wants to. So they do not want a negotiated release. In fact, they're committed to letting Israel commit mass slaughter. That's just what it comes down to.
And he's actually justifying this mass slaughter. Like, he won't even condemn. He won't even say it's unfortunate. You know, usually they do this thing where it's unfortunate, kind of giving Israel an out as if it wasn't their intention. It just kind of happened. This is what happens in war. But they don't even do that. And he's really giving Israel the green light. Not that Israel needs the green light, because they'll do whatever they want. But he's really giving Israel the green light, basically saying, well, unless Hamas agrees to, imploding itself, stuff like this is going to keep happening.
And again, just from the point of view of if your only concern is freeing the Israeli captives. So Israel's now freed 7 captives since October 7th from Gaza.
And killed how many?
How many of its own captives has it killed?
Yeah,
you know,
we know at least 3, but way more. 3 that they've confirmed.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's finish this clip.
Hamas needs to say yes to it. That's where President Biden's full effort, energy, and attention is. And you heard yesterday from the French president here in Paris that France stands behind that, the world stands behind that, and Hamas should come to the table and say yes.
That's just such a chilling clip because he's really giving his stamp of approval to future operations, just like the one we saw. He's not just taking any chance, not making any moves to even symbolically condemn what they did.
Hamas needs to just say yes, or else we're going to continue slaughtering in this cold, like, cadence, like, so detached. Oh man. Okay. More Jake. Jake.
Sorry, one more, guys.
Two different hospitals in Gaza say at least 236 people were killed as a part of the Israeli operation to rescue hostages. What is your understanding of how many Palestinian civilians, not militants, but civilians, were killed in that rescue mission?
We, the United States, are not in a position today to make a definitive statement about that. The Israeli Defense Forces have put out one number. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry has put out another number. But we do know this, Dana. Innocent people were tragically killed in this operation. The exact number we don't know, but innocent people were killed, and that is heartbreaking. That is tragic. The president himself has said in recent days that the Palestinian people are going through sheer hell in this conflict because Hamas is operating in a way that puts them in the crossfire, that holds hostages right in the heart of crowded civilian areas, that puts military emplacements right in the heart of crowded civilian areas. But every day that we see more innocent people lost is another horrible, awful, tragic day. And you know, our hearts in the United States and across the world break for that. But there is only one answer to stop that from happening going forward, and that is...
You'll never guess. It's Hamas has to say yes.
Yeah.
Let's see. You know, by the way, you know, the way he's talking, like, unless Hamas accepts our terms, there are going to be more people killed because that's the only way for Israel to free its hostages. Well, that's also the logic of October 7th. Given that Israel's an occupying power, has kidnapped thousands of Palestinians, put them in Israeli dungeons, the only way to free them is to kidnap some Israelis and do a prisoner exchange. So Jake Sullivan is endorsing the logic of October 7th.
Yeah.
With one difference. The Palestinians actually have a case because they're the ones being occupied. It's not Hamas occupying Israel. It's Israel occupying Palestinians. So again, this is the logic of terrorism where, you know, if we use sufficient force, then we will get our people back and we'll get our aims achieved. That's terrorism logic. Yeah. There's only one difference is that Palestinians actually have a moral case to it because they're the ones being occupied.
Yeah. Also, it's interesting how at the beginning she says the civilians killed. She wants to know about civilians killed as opposed to non-civilians. Now, I have a feeling that if when Israeli soldiers are killed, she doesn't particularly care about that distinction. I don't think that she's okay with it. So it's interesting that she has, she doesn't care if people who are members of Hamas are killed, but something tells me she does care if members of the Israeli army are killed.
Well, Katie, I will say she does perpetually look pretty like chuffed. She looks always like like she's in a bad mood. So who knows? Who knows? Maybe her heart breaks for the Hamas militants.
Maybe it does. Yeah.
Is a ceasefire and hostage deal that ends the military operations, brings the hostages home, and puts us in a position to give the Palestinians an opportunity for a better future for their people.
Yeah. They have so much blood on their hands already, and they are just getting ready to soak it in that much more blood, because the next time Israel does something like this, it's on U.S. hands as well.
Yeah. We're blowing their land to bits. We're destroying all their homes, but we want to put them to be in a better position for a better future. Okay. Right. Yeah. That really rings true. Okay. Please say that that's enough of Jake Sullivan.
It is.
Yes, it is. For now. Yeah. For now. We're going to come back to him because we also have to talk about
Ukraine.
Ukraine, and also a new threat of nuclear arms race, everybody. Just a free preview. The Biden administration dropped that the other day. We might have a new nuclear arms race. BT dub. Anyway, but we'll come back to that. The pier. Remember the big pier that Biden was going to build to surge aid to Gaza? That's the term that Samantha Power has been using every month since October 7th. We're going to surge aid to Gaza. The surge just never happens. She just keeps repeating the word surge. But anyway, the pier doesn't even work.
The word surge is surging.
The word surge is surging. Yes. So the pier has not worked. Parts of it have sunk into the ocean. And now here is the head of the World Food Program, Cindy McCain, making an announcement about her organization's role in the pier in light of Israel's recent massacre in Gaza.
And by the way, before we do that, we need some more likes, guys. Less than half of you have liked. And we know that there aren't more than half of you hate watching. So let's get this number up. Let's bump it up. We got 1.1 thousand, but we got 2,937 watching. So let's get those likes up. Let's see if what I said has any effect. All right, we got 1.2. Still not great, but because we're so committed to the news, we're going to keep going. But please know that if you haven't liked, you are part of the problem. All right, thank you. Let's hear from Cindy McCain.
Overnight, we learned that U.S. pier off of Gaza that was set up by the military has reopened. It had stopped functioning for a bit. How is it going? Because I know you are helping to oversee distribution.
Well, right now we're paused because I'm concerned about the safety of our people after the incidents yesterday. We also, two of our warehouses, the warehouse complex were rocketed yesterday. So we've stepped back just for the moment to make sure that we're on safe terms and on safe ground before we'll restart. But the rest of the country is operational. We're doing everything we can in the north and the south.
Thanks so much for that pier.
Yeah. So it's not clear if the rockets occurred, like the rocketing occurred during that operation. It looks like it was, though. That's my guess that it did.
Yeah.
So that's another side benefit of Israel's raid, on top of massacring hundreds of people, also leading to, most likely, the shutdown of the World Food Program's operations off of the pier. So, again, another Israeli success.
All righty. So let's see. Next we have, oh, wait, do we actually have Tom Cotton next?
Yeah, we'll get through as much of this clip as we can. But, he was on the Sunday shows. We are a Sunday recap show. So let's hear what Tom Cotton has to say. Senator Tom Cotton.
Joining us now, Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. Welcome back to the show. I want to start with your reaction to that daring rescue and the good news.
Daring rescue and good news.
Shannon, thanks for having me on. What a wonderful day for the people of Israel to have 4 of these hostages rescued in a truly heroic, well-executed mission yesterday. I had a chance to speak with Prime Minister Netanyahu shortly after the mission. He commended the Israeli Defense Forces and Shin Bet and the Israeli police who helped execute this operation.
He also
And
read me a
execute
bedtime
people.
story. He also read me a bedtime story and sent over milk and cookies because I love Netanyahu and the people of Israel. This guy's like, he basically works for Israel. He's
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah.
pretty much all he does.
Yeah, he's like, I called my boss right after.
Yeah.
To congratulate him.
I'm very dismayed by sources from the progressive left here in America, to include the New York Times and Washington Post, who are somehow condemning Israel for saving 4 hostages at the cost of supposedly more than 200 Palestinians. Now, we can't take at face value what Hamas says through the supposed Gaza Ministry of Health, but my advice to them would be, if you don't want your people killed in hostage rescue missions, then you shouldn't take hostages in the first place. You should release them once you have, and you certainly shouldn't hide them in civilian areas. So,
I mean,
the same message as I was talking about before applies to Israel. If you don't want October 7th, don't, not only kidnap people and put them in your dungeons, but don't occupy millions of people and deny them basic rights. He's, again, endorsing the logic of terrorism, except the difference is Palestinians actually have a case because they're the ones being occupied.
Right.
Israel doesn't.
Yeah, right. And by the way, Wilson, can we show this New York Times headline, which he is claiming condemns Israel? Israel rescues 4 hostages in military operation. Gazan officials say scores are killed. Is that very critical of Israel? Notice how it goes from active voice to passive voice.
So he's mad at that headline because he thinks it's like too sympathetic to Palestinians and too critical of Israel. When like they lead with the hostages being rescued and they put scores of people killed, and they don't even say by who.
Exactly, right. The way you would actually do this is you would say Israel rescues 4 hostages but kills hundreds, but no, scores. And if you actually go,
or Israel massacres
right, of course,
nearly 300 people as it rescues 4 hostages or something like that.
Right. I just meant just like syntactically the way you would do it without even changing kind of the content would be you say, right, Israel does this and then they do this. But go back to Wilson, can we see the a BBC headline that I also screenshot? It's the first slide in this. 4 hostages rescued from Gaza as hospitals say scores killed in Israeli strikes. They obviously got the memo. There's some scores memo going out, right? Call it scores. Don't mention the hundreds. Yeah. Scores could be 5 people. It could be 1,000 people, but certainly lets them get away with a lower number. All right.
I'd love for the New York Times and Washington Post editorial leadership to get together with Tom Cotton and be like, hey, man, like, what's the problem here? Like, we're on your side.
Well, actually,
doing your bidding.
That's actually, let's show the Washington Post headline because this is distinct from the New York Times and BBC. So let's see what the possible options are. So here's how the Washington Post actually surprisingly did it. More than 200 Palestinians killed in Israeli hostage raid in Gaza. That's how you could report on it. Now, of course, I get why for Tom Cotton, that's a crime against humanity or something. But it's so rich that even the New York Times one, which is so whitewashing of Israel, is offensive to him.
I'm shocked that headline made it into the Washington Post, and I would not be surprised if it got changed shortly afterwards. Because
we should check if there's a stealth edit.
To acknowledge Palestinians being killed by Israel, especially before acknowledging the rescue of the hostages. No, that's a no. That's shocking.
Yeah.
All right, more fun from Tom Cotton.
Sorry, guys.
Hats off to the Israeli security forces for a fantastic day in rescuing these 4 hostages.
So we understand there are still Americans being held. There has been discussion about whether our own special forces should be operating in that region. I know that, there's great concern about U.S. forces being on the ground there. There's been a pledge that won't happen. But what about our hostages and getting them out?
Well, Shannon, our military has several units that are specifically trained in hostage rescue. They always have to be available and ready to rescue American citizens wherever they may be. Those are our responsibilities, not Israel's or any other nation's. That said, the Israeli Defense Forces and security forces have the expertise operating in Gaza and working with the American government and specifically our intelligence services as well. I'm confident that if Israel's government had a chance to rescue American citizens, they would do the exact same for our citizens that they would do for Israel. But our hostage rescue teams always have to be available. We simply wouldn't want to have any kind of conflict inside or with Israel's hostage rescue teams. We want to work with them hand in glove to make sure every hostage gets back alive.
Yeah, and there are more than 100 of them. We're still trying to figure out how they come home. In the meantime, the president gave an interview to Time magazine a few days ago, and he was asked this. Some in Israel have suggested that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. Do you believe that? President Biden responded, I'm not going to comment on that, but then added this. There's every reason for people to draw that conclusion. What do you make of?
All right. Well, I gotta say, this is one of like I'd say this is the only advantage of having President Biden in office is he's so out to lunch that he gives us wonderful answers like this. He's asked, is Netanyahu prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation? And then he says, I'm not going to comment on that. But then he immediately comments on it.
Right. Literally the next sentence.
Like he's so clueless, he can't even remember what he just said.
Right.
So, you got to love that. And then he says there's every reason for people to draw that conclusion. Well, if that's the case, President Biden, why are you helping Netanyahu prolong the war? If you're admitting he's prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation, why are you helping him do it?
Right.
And I would have loved it if
so
Time Magazine
sinister.
asked that follow-up, but of course they won't.
Right. Right. I mean, it's so sinister. It's like not only are we complicit in genocide, but we are complicit in a genocide that is politically motivated.
And then if Time Magazine had asked Biden that follow-up, why are you helping him prolong the war for his own political self-preservation? Biden could have said, I'm not going to comment on that. And then he could have said, well, because I'm owned by AIPAC and I just love seeing Palestinians slaughtered.
Right.
That would have been his honest answer. Okay. Let's hear a little more Tom Cotton. Why not?
Yeah, sorry. Guys.
Every reason for people to draw that conclusion. What do you make of that response from him about our ally in the region? And what do you say to critics who say that is exactly what Netanyahu's doing?
Well, this is just another slander by Joe Biden against Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government at large. Prime Minister Netanyahu's policies are very popular. There is a war cabinet that is signing off on missions like you saw yesterday. At every turn, Joe Biden has tried to limit Israel's freedom of action, their ability to defend themselves, and to put more pressure on Israel, not pressure on Hamas and its patrons in the Middle East. Just look at what happened yesterday outside the White House. You had anti-American, pro-Hamas lunatics defacing and desecrating the statues of our great veterans, which is a plain violation of federal law. But Joe Biden's government allowed it to happen, and I bet we're not going to see any arrests or prosecutions for violating that law. I'll introduce legislation this week that imposes stiffer penalties so we can lock these lunatics up. But Joe Biden thinks that these
Okay, so that's a fun little twist. Tom Cotton wants to now create new punitive measures against people protesting the mass murder campaign in Gaza that he supports.
It's called the Looney Lockup Act. The Looney Lockup legislation.
That's very good. That's very good. I mean, I do love that he accused Biden of slandering Netanyahu. I wonder if Netanyahu can file a case. I wonder if that's actionable. Netanyahu can sue Biden for slander. I don't know why, because Biden sometimes says that Palestinians are being acknowledges sometimes that Palestinians are being killed.
No, I think the slander is that Bibi wants to
you're right. I'm sorry.
the war for selfish reasons. Yeah.
My bad. Yes. Sorry. Yes, exactly. So Biden blurting out the truth that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own preservation, that's slander. So maybe Netanyahu can sue Biden and Tom Cotton can testify on Netanyahu's behalf. The plaintiff calls Senator Tom Cotton.
Tom Cotton.
What a dramatic moment in the courtroom.
It would be amazing. Yes. Yeah. Well, also, it's interesting because if that's slander, then a lot of Israelis are guilty of this because a lot of Israelis have said this about Netanyahu. Even Israelis who support using force against Palestinians have said that he's being motivated by political ambition or political survival, I should say. So I hope Israelis countersue.
Mm, mm, mm. Okay, well, I think we can move on from Tom Cotton. We're running out of time, so we're going to get to just a few more clips. We have to go back to Jake Sullivan. I'm sorry, everybody,
guys.
but there is a proxy war going on in Ukraine. The world's top nuclear powers are on opposing sides of it. Biden recently escalated it by allowing Ukraine to use U.S. weapons to strike inside Russian territory. And there's talk now about even loosening that up even more, so allowing Ukraine to hit even more targets than just the area around Kharkiv, which is supposedly the current limitation placed on Ukraine. So here's Jake Sullivan talking about that.
The president recently approved allowing Ukraine to use U.S.-provided weapons to fire across the Russian border. A restricted area, but still a new policy choice here. Has that made a difference on the battlefield?
From the president's perspective, this was common sense. What was happening up around Kharkiv, which was new just in the last couple of months, was a Russian offensive where they were moving from one side of the border directly to the other side of the border. And it simply didn't make sense not to allow the Ukrainians to fire across that border to hit Russian guns and emplacements that were firing at the Ukrainians. So the president authorized that. The Ukrainians have carried out that authorization on the battlefield. And one thing I will point out is that the momentum of that operation in Kharkiv has stalled out. Now, Kharkiv is still under threat, but the Russians have not been able to make material progress on the ground in recent days in that area. And the United States will continue to support Ukraine in holding the line and pushing back against the aggressing Russian forces.
All right, so, and again, look, does Ukraine have the right to fire into Russia? Yes, Russia invaded Ukraine. Are there alternatives to letting Ukraine use U.S. weapons to fire into Russia and putting the U.S. in an even more direct role in this conflict than there already has been? Yes, there's diplomacy, which the Biden administration has refused to try now for well over 2 years, really for the last decade. So that's Jake Sullivan basically saying that we're doubling down and we're going to keep going. And just, because there's not enough conflict and danger in the world, the Biden administration recently dropped the news casually that, we might need to have a new nuclear arms race. We might have to build a whole new range of nuclear weapons to counter Russia and China. And this was mentioned casually. A few people noticed this. There was a few articles about this. I wrote about this on my Substack, but otherwise it's kind of been ignored, understandably, because we're backing mass murder in Gaza, so it's hard for everyone to keep track of everything. But this is a really serious announcement by Biden, because last year they had the opposite message. Last year, Jake Sullivan said there's no need for us to build new nuclear weapons. Now they're saying, you know what, we might have to go ahead and do that. So Jake Sullivan was asked about this in a very meek way by Margaret Brennan.
One of your top aides here in Washington on Friday gave a pretty notable speech, Jake, in which he said the U.S. may need to soon increase its stockpile of strategic nuclear weapons, given the expanding arsenals of America's adversaries. Have you seen evidence that Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran are sharing nuclear technology at this point? And what would trigger President Biden to make that decision?
Well, Margaret, I can't speak to intelligence matters, especially highly sensitive intelligence matters relative to nuclear capability. But what I can say is that we are concerned. We are concerned about cooperation among the countries you just mentioned, and we're concerned about the advancing nuclear arsenals of countries like China and Russia, as well as North Korea. This is something that we are focused on, we are looking hard at, and we will consult with our allies and partners on the best way forward to ensure a safe, reliable, and credible nuclear deterrent by the United States. We've taken no decisions. We will monitor the situation closely.
Is this because China has brushed off your attempts at arms control?
Well, actually, Margaret, in the last few months...
That's such a funny question. China, yes, China is building up nuclear weapons because China wants parity with the other nuclear powers, especially the U.S. and Russia. But China has been leading the way in asking everybody to adopt a no first use policy, where you pledge basically, we will never use nuclear weapons first. China has adopted that as its policy. The U.S. will not take that pledge because they reserve the right to use nuclear weapons first. So it's just funny, the question of like, has China rebuffed your efforts at arms control? Yes, China is not volunteering to cap its nuclear weapons. And I'd love it if China did, but that's the way of the world, especially after Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi gave up his weapons of mass destruction program, and that got him couped and killed by the U.S., including and lobotomized, including by Jake Sullivan's and his colleagues, because they were in office under Obama. This was, largely the work of people like Jake Sullivan and also Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power. So, given that China feels it needs a credible deterrent, but meanwhile, it's been saying to everyone, let's all pledge no first use, but the U.S. won't do that. Russia kind of claims it has a no first use, but I don't think they actually do. China has a legit no first use policy, but they can't find any other takers except for maybe India has it as well. Anyway, the point is that's China's effort at arms control, which the U.S. has rebuffed.
China has showed a greater willingness, not a lower willingness, to engage with us on questions related to proliferation and arms control. Those are nascent conversations. They're nothing like the kinds of intense arms control negotiations that we had with the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War or Russia in the post-Cold War era, but it's the beginning of a dialogue.
Oh, by the way, and speaking of which, another major move here, just that's important to know, is that the U.S. under Trump pulled out of the INF treaty.
Right.
That was a move, basically, I think, aimed at letting the U.S. position more missiles aimed at China. And the Biden administration, if it wanted to, could say, look, this reckless guy Trump pulled out of this really vital treaty. We're going to go back to that. But again, they don't care about arms control, so they haven't, and they've let it die. And back when Trump did it, it was a big deal, but nobody in the U.S. media cared because they were trying to convince themselves that he was really a Russian agent conspiring with Vladimir Putin.
And that contradicted that narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So Russiagate continues to pay dividends. So anyway, that's the news. It's not even fully apparent in that clip because it's mentioned very briefly by Margaret Brennan, and Jake Sullivan doesn't really address it. But basically, the Biden administration, their top arms control official, recently said we might have to build more nuclear weapons, and that's a really significant announcement because even the possibility of that is very dangerous. And on top of all the other dangers that we're facing, as we're pitted off against the other world nuclear power in a proxy war on its borders. Okay, Lindsey Graham, let's hear from him, his thoughts on the Ukraine war.
Oh, this is a good one.
And he's got a really great insight here into why
truth.
we're investing so much money into sacrificing Ukrainians to fight Russia.
But what did Trump do to get the weapons flowing? He created a loan system. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That $10 to $12 trillion of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West, not given to Putin and China. This is a very big deal how Ukraine ends. Let's help them win a war we can't afford to lose. Let's find a solution to this war. But they're sitting on a gold mine to give Putin $10 or $12 trillion of critical minerals that he will share with China is ridiculous.
I want to get to the Middle East with you.
So there you go.
There you have it.
I thought we were in it for freedom and democracy. Lindsey Graham says now we're in it for the minerals. We got to get those minerals. We don't want to have Putin and Xi share the minerals among themselves. So let's keep fueling a proxy war with the world's other top nuclear power and sacrificing tens of thousands of Ukrainians so we can control their minerals.
Yeah. Thank you for that moment of honesty. It's even more direct than Biden's thing where he says, I won't answer that. Not going to comment on that, but.
And I love how you can hear Margaret Brennan trying to shut him up as he's saying it because, you're supposed to push the line that we're in Ukraine to defend freedom and to stop Russia from invading everyone else. So, Ukraine's the front line. If we don't stop Russia there, they're going to invade everywhere else. I mean, that's Adam Schiff's famous line. We aid Ukraine so that we can fight Russia there and not here.
Right,
so
not here,
Lindsey Graham saying it's about minerals kind of interrupts that.
Yeah.
Okay. We're almost at the end of the show, but we want to turn to one more issue, which is Remember when Joe Biden pretended to care about immigrants when he ran against Trump? Well, that's long in the past. And now Biden is basically adopting Trump's immigration policies and making it much harder for people fleeing persecution and deprivation in their home countries to claim asylum. And the ACLU has vowed to sue over that. And so here is the Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, to defend the Biden administration's adoption of the Trump policy.
You have been dealing with this for several years. When he ran for president, and this is a big change, when he ran for president, President Biden repeatedly defended the asylum process you already had, you had in place, railed against former President Trump's plan. I want to read what then candidate Biden posted on Twitter back in July of 2019. Trump is fighting tooth and nail to deny those fleeing dangerous situations their right to seek asylum in our nation. We should uphold our moral responsibility and enforce our immigration laws with dignity, not turn away those fleeing violence, war, and poverty. How is this new policy not at odds with what the president said then?
What the president said then is what we are living today. We are allowing individuals to access asylum through the ports of entry pursuant to a program that we developed. We are allowing people to access asylum if they come from the countries of Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela through a parole program.
What about those who don't?
Oh, it's so generous. We're allowing people to come from the countries whose governments we've been trying to overthrow. That's what he's
I
saying.
know. It's like the one time they actually acknowledge root causes, but let's hear more from them. Hold on.
ACLU has pledged to sue the administration over this policy, comparing it to a Trump-era one. I know there are differences, but the ACLU asserts that your policy will put thousands of lives at risk. Yeah. If this is so great, why didn't he do it in the first place?
Martha, well, we've talked about that, and Congress needs to act. And in the wake of congressional action, this is the step that we take, and it's not the first step that we've taken. But I respectfully disagree with the ACLU. I anticipate they will sue us. We stand by the legality of what we have done. We stand by the value proposition. It's not only a matter of securing the border, Martha. We have a humanitarian obligation to keep vulnerable people out of the hands of exploitative smugglers. There have been many a story about.
Okay, so that's a new excuse. We're denying them asylum to protect them.
Protect them, yeah.
Keep them out of the hands of smugglers.
Them. Yeah.
I love liberals. You know, there's never an excuse too shameless to repeat. So they're literally adopting the Trump policy, and they're pretending as if it's something different. Now they're saying we're doing it for the asylum seekers' benefit.
Yeah, it's for humanitarian work.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting is what they're doing is they're saying that unlike Trump, they're going to basically limit people coming in seeking asylum only when it reaches a certain number. But the number is so low that it's effectively going to be the Trump ban.
Exactly right. And that's why they're being sued. And I look forward to many more just laughable excuses about how this really is not exactly what they campaigned against. You know, Nicholas Kristof, the liberal New York Times columnist, who's just like the most milquetoast caricature I can think of. He has a new column out where he's like, basically, you know, this is a little awkward for us liberals, because we're now imposing policies that we used to criticize. But here's why it's different. Here's why it's different. And anyway, it's just very comical. But
also, what is the political value in this? People who really care about borders are going to vote for Trump no matter what. And we don't have time to watch this, but there's a statistic, a poll that Margaret Brennan refers to, which is that only 20% of voters believe that Biden's policy is going to make a difference with people at the border. He's losing much more of his base than he's gaining in gaining new people. I mean, it's just politically unwise.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, well, he's really afraid of looking weak on the border. Obviously, he has a debate coming up in Trump. By the way, can't wait for that one. That's going to be.
I know, it's going to be amazing, epic,
an enjoyable experience.
We should live stream that maybe.
Siloed. I don't think I can get through it.
Okay,
it's just too.
Yeah, with the barf bag, maybe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of well, I don't know. Actually, I was going to say, speaking of barf bags. Yeah, let's barf at the conduct of the Hill.
Yeah.
First, Katie, they censored you when you tried to do a monologue
About
about
Israel being an
Israeli
apartheid state.
apartheid,
Yeah.
and this was long before October 7th. And now, in another move on the barfometer, they just fired Brianna Joy Gray.
I like to think of it. I walked so she could run.
There you go. Yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
walked as getting censored so she could run at getting censored. We actually have a news. This actually made the news, Aaron. Democracy Now! Can we play this clip?
Let's hear it.
News. The Washington-based news outlet The Hill has fired Brianna Joy Gray, the co-host of Rising, The Hill's daily morning show. Gray's been a vocal critic of Israel's war on Gaza. Last year, The Hill also fired the political commentator Katie Halper after she called Israel an apartheid state.
Okay, I just want to take this moment to give a shout out to Amy Goodman for reporting on this. And of course, major solidarity to Brianna Joy Gray, but also this is a historic moment because Bodie, my parents' dog, Bodie Pooch Pup is her hashtag, made it onto Democracy Now!
A huge achievement and well-deserved for Bodie, and certainly well-deserved for both of you to be acknowledged for, standing up to an outlet that now has just completely shown itself to be compromised. I remember when you were fired by them that it emerged that they hired some like really staunch Israel supporter in a major senior role. So
yeah, right.
I'm amazed that Brianna lasted this long.
Me too.
And
I actually think it kind of. Sorry, keep going.
No, she did an amazing job.
She did, yeah.
And it's the Hill's loss. I mean, on top of just how principled Brianna is, she was a great broadcaster. She's very talented. It's hard to find that kind of talent.
Yeah.
And she did a great job. So it's their loss. But obviously, but that's another case where people, it's like where ideology trumps even self-interest. Like,
right. Because she got great numbers on her monologue.
Yeah, she did. But it doesn't matter because
it doesn't matter. Yeah.
It's about narrative first, and the narrative when it comes to outlets like The Hill is support Israel, demonize Palestinians and their supporters.
Right. I actually think that one of the things that helped Bree stay on so long is the fact that The Hill basically lied. They claimed that when they fired me, it was over stylistic issues. And Brianna Joy Gray actually took like a moment, she dedicated an entire monologue to saying that she disagreed and didn't really believe The Hill's justification for firing me.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually think that probably helped put The Hill in a bit of a corner, because if they fired Brianna Joy Gray too early on, they would be admitting that, it was over Israel. I mean, we know it's over Israel. That it just gave them, I think, forced them to wait a little longer. So if anyone wants to fund a show with me and Brianna Joy Gray, we are definitely open to it. In fact, one of the things we did at the Hill, we were working on a pilot and it did really well right before I got fired, was a kind of show like The View with me, Rania Kalik, Abby Martin, and Bree. So looking for a big funder out there. It's time to do it. It's the leftist view.
Well, I hope that happens.
Yeah.
And I Bree will be fine. She has her own podcast, Bad Faith.
Bad Faith, yeah.
And
also
The Hill will
suffer because no one's going to watch
The
it
Hill
now
will suffer.
because it sucks.
Yes.
But also, seeing the vitriol being thrown at Bree is really amazing. It's so revealing. There's such an overlap between Zionism and anti-Black racism, which makes sense because Zionism is racist. As it functions, it's racist. And people are actually calling Bree a race hustler, which is just, everyone who calls her that is, I just want to say, they're just outing themselves as racist. But what's amazing about Bree is she manages to get it from both sides. I've never met someone who's called both a race hustler and a class reductionist, vulgar Marxist. So I want to give Bree a shout out.
By the way, Kate, I have a question. When did that go down with you and The Hill? Like, when was that?
When was that? I think it'll be 2 years ago in the fall.
Okay, so you know what? I also was a casualty of that because they haven't asked me on back since. I'm just searching my inbox, and
Oh, interesting.
I also was canceled by them as a result of, I think, my association with you. So The Hill is really, oh my God, Hill, you've made your bed.
Yeah.
You've made your bed.
You made your bed. Now you're going to lose a lot of.
Yes.
I don't know how to mix that metaphor.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
But
Well,
really,
listen.
shout out to Brianna Joy Gray. She's also another disgusting thing is watching people claim that she's not smart. I mean, she's so smart. If people were honest, they would just say she's smart, and I disagree with her. But there are, it's a toxic brew of Zionism, racism, sexism, and an inability to admit when someone's far smarter than you.
Yeah, I do not recommend getting into a debate with Brianna Joy
No.
Gray. She is pretty formidable, and
Yes.
congratulations to her on finally getting fired from a completely biased and compromised outlet. It's a badge of honor.
And it's owned by Nexstar.
Well,
Nexstar bought The Hill, and they have like investments in Israel.
Okay, everyone, that's the end of our show.
Oh, announcement. Can I just announce quickly? Guess who's going to be on the Katie Halper show tomorrow? It's someone we've had on, and his name rhymes with Schmiermeimer. Kind of. That doesn't even make sense.
Mearsheimer. You're going to have a John
Yes,
Mearsheimer.
John Mearsheimer, yeah.
It's very exciting.
The great
Very
John
exciting.
Mearsheimer, yeah.
And that's Tuesday night at what time?
7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, yeah.
On the Katie Halper Show YouTube channel. Check that out. Check us out at usefulidiotspodcast.com. You keep the show going. We really appreciate your support.
Could not do it without you.
If you can offer it, we're very grateful. And thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Monday Morning. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.